All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. So I'm Katie from Hackster. Welcome to our second webinar for ElephantEdge with Smartparks and IRNAS. We've got Luca Mustafa here today to share a little bit about the hardware and firmware that IRNAS is developing for elephant tracking collars. Unfortunately, Tim Van Dam from Smartparks, he was going to be joining us today, but he had surgery to remove his appendix and is at home recovering. He should be back on the program in the next few days, but we wish him a speedy recovery and appreciate Luca joining us for this webinar today. So Luca is, he has led Institute IRNAS since 2014 with his inventor and maker mindset. He is in charge of business strategy, keeps an eye on all aspects of hardware development and projects IRNAS is involved in. He's an expert in telecommunications and regularly speaks about benefits of open and future-proof hardware at events around the world. Luca is pursuing a PhD at University College London and an EEONG group and was the Shuttleworth Foundation Fellow. So today we're going to have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the event for Q&A. Luca will be giving a presentation before that. So if you do have any questions during the presentation, you can write them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible before the end of the webinar. So Luca, thanks for joining us, and I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thank you very much, Katie, for the kind introduction, and hello everyone from Slovenia. So I'm Luka Mustafa, sitting here at IRNAS in Maribor in the center of Europe, where we do development of some very cool projects for specialized applications and doing essentially everything to the cloud associated with IoT devices and wireless optical systems per se. So there's some very interesting projects we're doing, and you may know us quite well from the wireless optical systems, from say penguin monitoring with Aribada to like turtle trackers underwater, and various kinds of open color GPS trackers and other solutions we built over the years with Smartparks per se. So nature conservation is a bit part of the work we do, and I'm very excited to talk about what we've been working with Smartparks and Hackster together on ElephantEdge today. So just to set the scene a bit wider on the nature conservation, like what are some technological solutions that we may be looking at, and then we'll dive deeper into the specific technology implementation. So starting from top left, yeah, looking at penguins in Antarctica. This is a very exciting topic we've been working on with Aribada, which is really collecting data in a super remote place of the world, such that you can count how many animals are there, what's happening, and the particular technology limitation that was there thus far is you set the camera, you sit there, you come back a year later with a big boat, you get the card or the camera, download images. It takes a year for some results to get essentially them back, then you need to process them and so forth. While lately the advances in machine learning, particularly say with edge impulse, with the low power developments of cameras and things like that, enable us to build capture systems, trackers, which will work fully autonomously anywhere in the world and then send things to the cloud, either through a terrestrial network or actually through a low power satellite connection that we'll be talking about today as well. And tying this into the elephants, essentially penguin camera in Antarctica and the elephant payload are roughly in the same scale range. So we can also think about solutions. How do we port them between different animals, and how do we make really universal open solutions that all people and groups that are really concerned about nature conservation can use very effectively. Likewise, tracking turtles is to some aspect similar to rhinos. You need some very small trackers which need to survive very harsh conditions. And when you look at, say, rhinos to elephants, well, all are like large land animals which will severely abuse whatever you put on them. So these things need to survive. and at the same time, they are very endangered. So we're looking at technological aspects. How do we minimize that part? So jumping straight into various IoT technologies we use, we combine the latest and greatest in terms of LoRa connectivity, GPS positioning, NB-IoT communications for some applications as well. Running all of this, and particularly everything we're building for ElephantEdge on the Zephyr RTOS, and also adding edge impulse support on that, so we can really pack a lot of things into small and reliable devices. Looking at the ElephantEdge, so today we'll be discussing how the hardware is being developed at the moment, what are the features we're adding, why this building blocks have been selected, and what this enables us overall. So please feel free to ask any questions in the chat. I can try to address some of them as part of the presentation, particularly that we're talking about different topics here. So overall, the ElephantEdge tracker is the most advanced and versatile elephant tracker there is out there, and definitely the most advanced ones that will be built in the very near future. Definitely the core of the functionality is GPS tracking, so knowing the location of the animal. And this is really an external factor because with this you can see if it's either outside the fence, if it's going wild and about to destroy something, and you can issue warnings. This is like the basic thing that's been used for the past years, and in the previous webinar, I believe you all received quite a nice introduction into the application as such. However, just some points on a map with a timestamp aren't telling us very much about the animal. So we're mostly interested now in the motion analysis, in figuring out what is the animal doing, is it under stress, and all the external factors we can figure out from a reasonably small device compared to the animal as such. And this is the topics you guys have been working on with the challenge on the Hackster, figuring out what to do with data, how to run edge impulse on this, and really how to create content that will be able to run on these trackers to conserve the animals better. From the connectivity perspective, this goes into very remote areas. So best case, we have a LoRaWAN network there, which is quite a common option in a lot of wildlife parks around the world. But at the same time, we also want to keep satellite connectivity just in case if the animals go out and if they're unreachable. While at the same time, we need to make sure that it's all low power and all reliable to run something over a long period of time. So the particular long time concern here is long battery life. Because to put this on an animal, you need to put it to sleep, and you want to minimize that as much as possible, because with that you're increasing the risk of the animal getting hurt or any other thing. So you really want to do that, and every once in a while, which is say 5 to 10 years, somewhere in that range, particularly for animals. We don't want to do this more often than not. And just to put things in perspective, here's one of my colleagues, having a full color assembly. So they, really showing how big this is actually. You know, fits around a human, and this is just for a normal sized elephant. It does need to survive all the various crazy situations. So, elephant against a tree is quite a common sight. Elephants go swimming as well, and well, you need to put in enough power so this survives for a long period of time. So here we're actually showing the most advanced model of the tracker, which consists of two components. There's a tracker on top, which has most of the brains and some batteries, and there's a whole extra battery pack at the bottom, which is connected to the top one, such that we can have plenty of power available for more advanced analytics and really doing quite some more things on the device itself. So the case study, or like where this is being deployed, and just showing you some perspectives from the field. You can see an animal, essentially an elephant, being collared with the previous version of this tracker already, where we've been validating the mechanics and a bit of the internals, what was there, as well as and with an output where we see the animal in the wild, how it's nicely moving about, and we see the motion in this case, and some basic analytical data like the orientation of the tracker. And really the ElephantEdge version is about adding all the advanced features and adding the advanced analytics to better understand what's happening here in real time. So to best discuss this, we prepared a system overview shown here, which shows all the various components of the tracker, and we'll be diving deeper today into each one of it separately and discussing various aspects of this. So yeah, feel free to put in questions about certain aspects of this, and we can dive deeper if there's any particular question on it. So to summarize, here we have in the center, we have the core part of the tracker, which means that we have memory, we have sensors, we have a GPS receiver and a Semtech transceiver for LoRaWAN and Wi-Fi positioning in precise and low power setup. We have an orderly processor for basic Bluetooth communication and all the processing that needs to be done, and the soft cell providing the power. And on the periphery side, so we have Bluetooth connectivity, Wi-Fi connectivity, legacy tracking, which is VHF or UHF to be used with those Yagi antennas you see normally for tracking animals. LoRa connectivity as the bulk of the communication option for this device, meaning that we can do LoRa to terrestrial or LoRaWAN to space through Lacuna network, as well as a bunch of antennas from Tower Glass for GPS and for other perspectives as well. But the really smart part is the edge impulse component, which is outside and also inside the tracker, where we process all the bulk of the data that's available here. Looking at the payload, you've seen some photos earlier in the presentation. It's a box about of this size, so you can like imagine it's like a large palm of a human hand, which has all the brains inside to do the tracking part. So at the moment where we are with the development process, we have the first version of the Edge tracker up and running. So this is the core part, which has the bare minimum features. So I have the board actually here already. So this is a much smaller size than you will see in the Elephant per se. And the reason why we've started this as the intermediate development process is that we can most easily develop on this form factor and also use it for some other trackers. And the final version essentially will be this scaled up to the elephant-sized board. Yeah, so this comes on here with all the extra sensors and extra batteries we have for the ElephantEdge application. And on top, we're putting a reasonably large antenna, but we're doing this because we want to communicate to space through Lacuna, a network as shown here. Right, so let's dive right deep into the parts of the system, and let's cover the GPS positioning first, because this is really the core feature of the tracker itself. So the GPS network, you know about, well, there's multiple of them called GNSS as like an overarching technology. So there's GPS, there's Baidu, GLONASS, and a few other systems out in the world. And those are transmitting essentially RF signals, which we receive at the device with the GPS receiver. Typically, you see this as a ceramic antenna of this sort, but definitely there's other antenna options as well. And we use those signals to resolve the position of the device. Here, and this is one of the few, or actually maybe the first tracker that uses a hybrid system of a high precision GPS receiver from u-blox and an ultra low power receiver from Semtech. So we can do tracking in two different configurations. Looking at that in more details, probably one of the better GPS receivers on the market is u-blox M8G at the moment, which we've integrated in all the trackers thus far. which is a true GPS receiver. What we mean by that is the GPS receiver on its own resolves the accurate position, time, speed, and plenty of other parameters about the motion. So you can do real-time tracking with it, or you can wake it up every once in a while, and it will acquire a fix to let us know what is the position. So the on-device positioning is very important, particularly for when we need to know on the device what is the position as such. However, the drawback of the GPS technology is that it requires quite a bit of processing, and that's why also it uses a fair amount of power in this case. So the disadvantage is if we do a fix every 4 hours, 6 hours, once a day, it will take quite a bit of power because you more or less do a cold fix as the almanac ages over a long period of time. So, for example, if you want to be doing tracking every few hours, this may not be the best, and you will use quite a bit of power. And on the other side, the Semtech LR1110 positioning solution allows us to do very quick fixes. So this uses a bit different approach to listening for the GPS signals. It listens for a fixed amount of time, uses a fixed amount of power, gathers the data, but it does not compute the GPS position on the device itself. So it sends about 20 to 50 bytes of data to the server, and we get a GPS position there, which means that we offload the power usage from the device to the server, but we don't get the actual position on the device itself. So here we see the combination of the two can give us some very, very interesting benefits. I see a question which is worth addressing here. So for slide 12, does the color circuit board have all the components shown in the slide 12? Yeah, so the ElephantEdge color has all of these components plus a few more that are not shown in this photo. Looking further at the LR1110, why we're using it in this project is because it doesn't only combine the super low power GPS receiver, but also has the LoRa transceiver option and Wi-Fi option, which we also utilize here to add extra features. Looking at the U-Blocks M8 series in particular, so the M8G we use in this case, we get some interesting specs. It's very, very sensitive. So at minus 167 dBm, you can get GPS positioning in some very tough situations, even sometimes without a clear view of the sky, but that is also largely associated with the antenna system that's in place. The question we also have about GPS here is why would you need the actual GPS position if you resolve that with the LoRa receiver? Well, in some cases, you want to be doing like geofencing. So you want to figure out where the device actually is. So the device itself knows if it's, say, outside a specific area, it needs to start behaving differently. On the other hand, you can also use a true GPS receiver, like the one shown here, to acquire time, to acquire some almanac data and so forth, which can help the other GPS receiver run more efficiently, meaning that you can use a hybrid combination of the two to come up with a very power efficient solution in this case. We've done some very detailed analysis of this setup and of both receivers to see this. So there was a webinar and a blog on our site that goes into full details of this. So today I'll just summarize this for a bit. But more or less, we used both receivers, compared their performance, and we got some very interesting results in this case. Particularly for any tracker, we want to see the benefit of using a technology versus like precision and the power used. So here we compare LR1110 and Zoe M8G for 30-minute fixes and for say one or 1.5 minute fixes. But so we see this on the photo in terms of performance. And the interesting part is if you're running like a true GPS receiver, you will see that you get a bit different precision with it. So you will use more power, or you'll have less precision the less often you use it, versus a receiver like LR1110 is you simply get the position with a equal amount of spread regardless of how often you take the position. So what that means in practice is, if we look at scenarios at 1-minute fixes, 30-minute fixes, and 4-hour fixes, and the average errors, we see they, well, stay about the same in most cases, but the average time to fix is the crucial one, because that tells us how much power the solution is using. So we see particularly the interesting one is, say, using a true GPS receiver like u-blox MHG. If we do it every 4 hours, we'll use about 340 microwatts for a fix, versus LR1110 always uses 27 microwatts, no matter what is the time in between the fixes, which means that based on the interval, you get an opportunity to do this at a much lower power and get a much longer battery life from the device as such. So summarizing the power consumption, also taking into account the amount of data you're sending, because the GPS position you can pack, say, into 10 bytes. If you have a raw GPS that needs server-side resolving, you need, say, 40 to 50 bytes in this case. So the communication overhead adds a bit. We do see that for LoRa, based obviously on the spread factor, this differs a bit. And actually, for some like fast transmissions, the overhead is minimal. We see, say, fix uses a bit, and fix plus message with SF7 spread factor on LoRa is very small. But if we use longer range and more robust communication, we will use much more power for communication than we actually use for the GPS fix. And these are the situations we want to avoid with trackers as well. Before we jump into LoRa, or actually as a good intro question to LoRa from one of the listeners is, can you use LoRa TDOA geolocation solution? So that means the LoRa communication works such that we have gateways which are geographically located in the area, and based on the time of arrival of signal to them, we could resolve the position. And this is actually something Smartparks has been doing with the geolock sensors for quite a while in Rhinos now. The issue is normally the density of the network, because for a reliable position, you need for every message to be received by at least 4 gateways. And when you are in very remote areas, this is proving to be super difficult to achieve in this case. And that's why, yeah, having a proper location device has been shown to be quite optimal for the trackers in this case. So we jump back to LR1110 in terms of the LoRa connectivity, as it's primarily a LoRa transceiver. The interesting part of that is it has multiple RF outputs, actually 2 RF outputs, 1 input for the essentially LF band, where the LoRa communication functions, and some for the higher frequencies where we run GPS and Wi-Fi. So using this chip, we are doing 2 types of communication. So as mentioned, we do LoRa to local network, and in most cases we assume there is a local network. So you send the message, say every 10 minutes you send the status message, and every fixed interval time, however much that is, you send also the GPS position. Typically this ranges between 15 minutes to like 4 or 8 hours, subject to definitely the tracker size, the battery life required, and so forth. The opportunity lost, or well gained, essentially with the Elephant tracker, which is sufficiently large that we can include an antenna here for LoRaWAN to space Lacuna communication, is that we can do very much remote communication anywhere in the world, no matter if the device goes outside its local network, and you can get at least some status updates, so you don't think it's just lost into the void somewhere. So Fabienne is asking a question here that it's worth answering. So, which is, are you only using the GPS satellite or also GLONASS, Baidu, Galileo? Does it change something on the u-blox LR1110 comparison? Yeah, so on the LR1110, we are using 2 constellations at the same time, so GPS and Baidu. On the u-blox, we normally just enable 2 or 3 constellations to get a better fix in that case. And definitely a multi-constellation setup is more optimal because it will give you better positioning accuracy in a short amount of time, effectively. Jumping a bit into how the Lacuna connectivity works. So instead of having gateways nicely on mountains and hills around, we have the tracker talk directly to the small satellite, which talks to either directly another satellite or to the ground, and we get those messages at some later point in time when it passes, say, across Europe or similar. And these messages are then locally joined into a LoRa network, which means that the trackers can have the same LoRa network deployed, and one of the gateways is, well, virtually in space. So that gives us quite some redundancy in terms of communication here. And from that, we jump to the next part of connectivity included in this, which is Bluetooth Low Energy, which is part of the Nordic semiconductor chip here, which we use for 2 particular functions. One is for configuration and the upgrade part, and really the user experience of the person running this tracker. Because what we've seen from experience in the field is, say, when you have a tracker like this, so this is one of the Smartparks open call line trackers, is a solid potted blob with no helpful connections. It's really hard to see, is it working properly, is it charged, putting in the device, really understanding what this is doing without some kind of local connectivity. And that's why for the ElephantEdge tracker and literally all other trackers, we've made a design decision to include BLE in all of them. So at least you can use your phone to check the status of the device. So the battery is charged, it's up and running, and you can locally do a few things with it, as well as very simply do a firmware upgrade. So you can simply upgrade that from the app of your phone to add new logic. Now, this is also particularly interesting when we add edging pools and other on-device processing, because this is really being developed over time. Unlike firmware, where you do mostly bug fixes and add some features, this will be really evolving with better devices. So maybe you find a device in the field after a year, you upgrade it with new features, and same piece of hardware does much more. And this is really the beautiful part of it. The second functionality of BLE, which is quite useful, is proximity. So you can work out proximity to other beacons, phones, and see what's happening around the animal, as well as you can do proximity to other animals in the area. So for example, if you have a herd of some type of animal which is colored, and like more of them have colors, you can work out how close they are, how often they meet, and things of the sorts. How is this implemented? Well, it all runs on NRF52840, which is a very capable processor running on Zephyr RTOS and with MCU boot underlying this for upgrades. So for those of you who are not familiar with Zephyr RTOS, look it up. It's a very nice project for IoT RTOS applications and firmware development. And just recently, it's also supported by Google, so this will be taking off in the near future quite actively. There is a question at this point about long-range BLE. So it won't be supported in the first instance, but all hardware is there, all software is there, so this is a feature that needs to be tested and essentially added to these devices as the whole application develops. About the long range BLE, the use case is not fully defined yet. So we're very much open up for that discussion to see if that is useful for actual field use. But given this is only a software feature, it's very straightforward to upgrade that in the process. The hardware implementation of the Bluetooth communication comes in two flavors. So one option is using the u-blox, say Nina B30 type module. The nice part about using a module is it's a nice compact package, reasonably easy to put on a board, assemble it, allows for a simple PCB design, can have an onboard antenna, but in some cases it's not very practical for putting in a very small design. So what we do for all these trackers is we run NRF 52840, which is inside both options. And then depending on the tracker size, we choose either we use the raw chip, which has much more work associated, or a module per se. And for the Elephant tracker, we'll be using a module because we have enough space. It simplifies the design and it makes for a much more quickly robust solution than with the design we have at the moment. Jumping further into functions for Wi-Fi positioning, and this is quite an interesting one, which essentially we get with LR1110, which is seeing the proximity of various different devices. So we can do Wi-Fi scanning with this, see MAC addresses of essentially access points, but also of some other things. You could also look at smartphones and so forth. So you can see proximity to settlements, which is quite interesting if that gets closer to houses, and you can see Wi-Fi is pretty much everywhere. You can even do things here with Wi-Fi, and this is a bit comparable to BLE, so you can use either or for a similar functionality. You see some beacons, so you put beacons, say, on trees or on some like watering holes or other known locations. And then you can detect proximity to that very well. If that is of interest, you also have a GPS location, so that is a bit redundant in some cases. The particularly interesting one is detection of like cell phones in proximity, particularly people, reducing the conflict and also seeing if this has an impact on the animal conservation as such. Tracking even further, there's a legacy option, which is quite important. So this VHF, about 150 megahertz. As mentioned earlier, you normally see people with like Yagi antennas searching for these animals in some documentaries. And while this is definitely not secure, like anyone can home in on the animal and find where it is a very straightforward and effective way of locating something in the wild exactly. It brings you to the actual position of the animal, and the rangers and people actually in the field are very happy to use this method. So we decided to add this to the trackers, and we can turn it on demand, meaning that we can send a LoRa message or have some kind of a timer set up such that this will turn on, ping for a while when you're looking for the animal actively, for example, when you need to do a health check on it or something like that. And then it turns off. So it keeps the animal more secure and you still get that feature when required. So yeah, that's quite a fun one. Yeah, unfortunately I don't have the antenna slide here, but I'm quite sure you guys can imagine how this looks in the field. And the battery part, that's always a fun topic to address. And this is quite important to discuss at this point, because this is mostly related to software features we put in place. And we'll firstly look at, say, some Rhino trackers, which are another solution from Smartparks that we've developed jointly, which is a really small-sized tracker with LoRa and GPS. A small single cell, but for this, I have a nice chart in terms of how much power is used for which function. So we see a very small part is actual sleep of the device, quite a sizable chunk is GPS RTC, so just keeping the clock running so GPS fixes are more efficient, and then the actual GPS fixes are the large majority of the power consumption of the device. And the important part here is why we mentioned so much about optimizing the GPS part is that we can carve out a large part of this GPS power consumption and save it for some other applications like machine learning and other data processing on the device as well. And we actually let it do more with the same amount of battery in this case. The technology used in these trackers is primarily lithium cells, lithium chloride, so lithium sulfur oxide chloride. Why? Because these cells are of very low self-discharge, which means they lose less than 1% themselves. They can do quite significant pulses in that case, although for like very, very small sizes, their capacity is reduced significantly if the pulses are too high. That, for example, is not an issue for the elephant trackers. So I have some of the cells here, so you guys can see them. This is packaged for a different type of tracker than elephant. Essentially, we will stack a bunch of the cells such that we get the full capacity required in that case. And should some technology inside the tracker use large peaks of power, we'll add a lithium capacitor or supercapacitor to smooth the peaks out a bit, but all will have some self-discharge and actually some extra power consumption in the devices. On the photo, we show also some 18650 LiPo cells, which are normal rechargeable cells, which you see in a bit larger laptops these days. They're a very good option for trackers that you want to deploy under 2 years in duration, because otherwise their self-discharge will be limiting the application, and they will lose a lot of power just sitting there not doing anything. And for longer periods of duration, we use primary cells like shown here. Now, ElephantEdge power consumption, and particularly how this is related to firmware and what we can do with this. So we want the device to run for up to 10 years, operate at high temperatures, to be compact and have low self-discharge. So that's why we've selected soft LS17500 cells. In this case, which we trust and have been using for a number of years and have very good experience with, but they're also one of the best in the market for this particular application. So over that, we get about 21 amp hours of capacity, which in turn over 10 years means you can use about 250 microamps in average. And well, you can do quite some calculations with this. We know a fair chunk of this capacity will go for GPS fixes per se. The rest we use for sensors and computing on the device. So what you can typically observe is you will draw a few milliamps with the processor when it's running at full speed, meaning that you can't run the processing power non-stop. You need to be in this deep sleep for a long period of time and then do computation as quickly as possible and then go back to sleep. Say for working with machine learning models, the best case of working with this, and we'll discuss this with the sensors, is to collect sensor data at as low power as possible, store that information again at low power as possible, and then wake up every once in a while or based on some trigger and then process this result and then only send the answers through the communication network. As seen earlier, the more data you send, the more power you burn, and you definitely don't want to be putting in too much power just in the power consumption, just in the communication itself and not in the actual useful work, which is what you call computing in this case. So from this is really where you guys come in. Coming up with models, coming up with strategies, what we can do with data, and how we can come up with some clever answers on the device itself, and then we make sure all the rest of the periphery and hardware works properly at low power, and the data is properly collected. So we process it and yeah, just answer what makes most sense in this case. So we have three sets of sensor groups in this case for the ElephantEdge tracker. One is motion. So there's a very low power accelerometer on board from ST. So that one we can use for alerts. We can use this to trigger on motion. Typically, we do this to determine when the animal is moving and so forth. The 6D, so IMU, so accelerometer plus gyro, or eCompass, which is accelerometer plus compass, will give a lot more data in terms of motion. And from that, we can actually start figuring out some very, very useful things about the animal per se. Meaning that, is the animal running? Is the animal sleeping, walking? Like, these are the very basic ones. But given that we say send the status message every 10 minutes, it would be nice to know what is the status of the animal at that particular time. So that's definitely one of the top 3 models that are useful, just classifying animal motion into some number of classes. And that will tell us what is it doing. The second, let's say, quite useful model, but a bit harder to understand, is figuring out when is the animal upright and walking and oriented correctly for a long period of time, such that we can get a good GPS fix. Because what we see in particularly smaller animals, not elephants as much, but more like lions and cheetahs and smaller cats of those sorts, is they will move about, they will lie down, they will roll around and so forth. And when, say, you have a tracker like this, GPS is pointing this way, when the animal is lying down or has the tracker pointing into the ground, that is not very good for GPS fix. So what we do at the moment is we wait for the tracker to point up and then try to do a GPS position. But what would be helpful is to know, okay, the animal is walking, and like walking is likely the correct orientation to do a GPS fix and collect some other things, versus just randomly moves to the right position. So this is super useful, and like the first two are more or less connected in this case. Interactions will be very interesting from these models. To see from the data of interactions with other animals, like what's happening in the area, and really send results from that. In terms of sensors, I see a question from Antonio if it would be not better to use a part which has a machine learning core already built in for the gesture detection. Yes, that is definitely an option to put it in there. What we've seen at the moment is we need firstly the data and see how this motion things will work in the field. And that's why we'll firstly run the trackers in a way where you can collect all the data, do this on the processor. And once it's very clear what the applications are, we can even optimize the power further with, say, IMUs, which have machine learning already built into them. So that's definitely a space we're actively watching and will be doing in the future. Sound is also a big topic. So that's why we decided to add 2 different microphones, which we can use interchangeably, having a bit different power consumption and a bit different options. And here, we definitely would like to understand what's happening around the animals, listening to the animal itself or the sounds around, analyze like what kind of communication is going on, can we say detect stress and so forth. The tricky part is keeping the power low enough, which we can do with some thresholding. So essentially we jump to the processing part as soon as the levels are across a different threshold. And the tricky part comes, like, how do we start with all of this? I mean, these unit trackers which collect all the data which you can train. So understand you guys are doing a very good job emulating all of this behavior, simulating things with the sensors. And that's why we've also decided to build a very good storage part into the device. So there's actually two storage elements. One is just a normal flash, which has settings, configs, and device logs, like position logs. But as well as we add the large SD card, so we can write raw data to it, and then have that retrieved either physically or downloaded, say through BLE when in range of the animal. And then we can improve the available data so the machine learning models can be improved and the trackers become better overall. And this is quite important because we'll be seeing a lot of cases where we can't get good data straight off the bat. And we want to, say, have a tracker which we can improve every year for 10 years in a row with the data that's coming in. The practicalities of getting this data, well, are up for discussion, really, but there's two strategies available. As sending this through LoRa is rather impractical. So it's either a BLE offload at a very short distance, say next to a watering hole or some location where the animal frequents, or it's actually taking the tracker off if there's a good situation, that swapping the card, getting the data, and putting it back in. With that, we end up at the mechanics, which I've already shown in the beginning. So that is a very sturdy custom-made enclosure which we build, where we tightly pack all the electronics, batteries, fine-tune the antennas for the communication, and then this is ready also with custom belting to be put on the animal, like you see here. Given the time we have left, I would like to open up the floor for some questions that I haven't answered yet. So feel free to post them if they're here, and Kate can help with that or address any of the ones associated with the challenge itself.
Great. Thanks, Luca. We did have one actually come in through the chat that I didn't want to miss, that had asked about sustainability of using solar cell for longer battery life. Would that be a good option, do you think?
Yeah, so we've explored solar cells a number of times. It's particularly risky because they are, well, exposed. They will break in a lot of these conditions. And also over like a 10-year period, they get dirty, they get broken. So we consider it as a high-risk method. For some trackers, it can be a secondary source of power, meaning that, well, you do the basic amount of work on the built-in batteries, and then solar can be used to supplement that to be able to do more work, essentially. But as primary means, we find it rather too risky.
Okay. Then in the case of like machine learning models, are they supposed to build the model with audio, image, and accelerometer data? Or are they allowed to create more than one model for image? Also, are they supposed to build the model for other sensors like water sensors and Wi-Fi sensors to detect people, or does that come under the IoT dashboard?
So this part is actually rather open-ended. So I may not be the best person to answer that. But from our perspective, like all the data which we can make available from the tracker will be available, and you guys can really suggest like the best things you can imagine this can be done from it. And then we'll take all of this and try to best put it in the trackers.
Great. Is there a way to use, like, can they use motion to charge the battery? Are there any rules around that?
Well, so motion to charge the battery, there's some kinetic chargers available in some concepts. So far, again, we've seen that for the size of the kinetic charger, you simply put primary lithium cells in there and you will get a lot of power from that already with much less risk.
Great. How are you planning to download the sound data through Bluetooth?
Yeah, so Bluetooth is definitely an option, and particularly for testing, this is the most straightforward way of doing it. The other ways are either retrieving the SD card if that's an option, or in some cases using LoRa, well, with the FSK modulation for faster data transmissions, but that gets a bit trickier as well.
Okay, great. I'm not sure if I'm understanding this question correctly, but what's the infrastructure needed in the field, for instance, for India with thick vegetation?
Right, so the infrastructure needed, you need some LoRa gateways, and the coverage of those will be vastly different based on the area. So it's hard to give a good answer on that, but it's definitely best to follow up with that with the Smartparks team, as they are the ones deploying things in the field, also, yeah, in various locations around the world, and they have best experience how to build LoRa networks to talk to trackers in those cases.
The question that we had at the beginning when you were on slide 12 and you were showing the items in the collar, I think the user had asked for, maybe it was like the 14th slide had the peripherals part, so that was actually what his question was referring to.
Okay, let's jump there.
Oh, does the collar circuit board have all the components shown in slide?
Yeah, so the circuit board we have here has a large number of these components, except the wide selection of sensors and data storage. So that's still coming up in the next revision on a bigger board. But the core of all the GPS and communication parts is already in place.
Okay. I think he said that that wasn't the right slide that he was asking about, though, and was thinking it was maybe a couple past that.
Okay, well, yeah, 14 is GPS positioning hybrid, so I'm not
all right, then I'm not sure what which one he was referring to. So if you do have a question about the slides, these slides will be shared after in an email next week. So you can feel free to ask a question or send an email to contest@Hackster.io, and we can check in with Luca and make sure that to get that question answered. I'm gonna put that in the chat box right now. So contest@Hackster.io if you have any questions. There's also a discussion board, which I'll put in the chat box too for the contest. So if there are any questions that you didn't get answered during this presentation or that we didn't quite address, you can definitely go and ask on there, and somebody will be able to help you out there too. All right, so then let's see, we've got one other question, and I'm not sure if this is something that you can help us answer, Luca, or if this is something that we'll need to have posted on the discussion for contests. But do they need to develop something for the collar, or can they make something which can be used as a monitoring system mounted at fixed locations for this contest? Is it specific to the collar?
Well, it's not entirely specific to the collar as far as I understand, because the dashboard is used, well, on a fixed location, well, on a server side, which aggregates data from collars. But yeah, it's probably best to check in with the contest team on that.
Okay. Great. Yeah, we can definitely do that. And again, if you have that question, please post it to the discussion board, and someone who has those rules will be able to answer that for you. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other posted. So if you have questions, you can post them in the Q&A quick. But I'm going to post the discussion forum here in the chat, so you guys can see that. So if you do have any questions that come after this, you can go and check that out. The contest ends in 2 weeks. So next Friday is the last day for solutions. So make sure that you're working on that and submitting your projects. And thank you so much, Luca, for your time. This was really great information, and I really enjoyed it.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the invitation. Also, thank you very much to the whole Hackster team, and also to Adam to put this whole thing together. And yeah, we're really excited to get this into the field in the very near future.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. It looks like we're out of questions, so we're going to end our session for the day, and we appreciate all of you coming and joining us, and we'll chat again later. Good luck on the contest. Bye.
Good luck, everyone. Bye.